Today I'm going to be discussing screenwriting, approaching projects and collaboration. In particular surrounding the work of Sophie Eugeine Dessertaine-Williams, who is a screenwriter who works in Sydney as a freelance script editor and consultant, collaborating with other artists and other writers. She also does a lot of original concepts and projects. These projects include Coda, which is a feature concept set in a reality where euthanasia is big business. It's a fad to have an exciting funeral and death, and it follows the life of a young cancer patient. Headcase, a 6-piece web series following a young woman who is triggered by the apparent disappearance of her next door neighbor. Finally, most recently, The Retreat, an 8-part series written by Sophie and Lucy Dunlop, which follows a diverse group of women who come together for an all-women's retreat away from the men in their lives. When approaching a new original project, what aspects do you focus on? For example, the characters or the themes or the plot? To which Sophie said, for my own projects, I usually come up with an idea in a really weird way, so it's hard to say. Often my premises and my concepts come from a joke I've made or a scenario I've riffed at length about. I think for me now, as I mature as a writer, I'm making more of an effort to work on plot, as before I've gotten bogged as in the past I've gotten bogged down in the theme and character, because that is the fun part for me. Plotting, however, saves you time and heartache and loses those moments that destroy you as a writer. I think it's interesting that Sophie discusses, the idea of using a joke or a premise that you've riffed about extensively as a concept, and working on that and writing about that. It sounds a lot like an informal way of doing the ideation process of just looking at something that people need and then coming up with an answer to it. But instead, it's looking at an interaction and coming up with a response to it that's entertaining or funny or interesting or informative, and then working on that to make it more interesting and funny and informative and interesting, which I try to do as a writer, just working on concepts in my head. I lose most of them because I don't write them down, which I should probably do. For my second question, I asked, how does this compare to when someone approaches you with a project or concept that they want to collaborate with you on? And she said, I tend to approach things differently depending on what the project is. If I'm collaborating with someone who has come up with a concept or has arrived with a lot of existing ideas and personal connection, I try to look at how to best add to these and support the project while having a new perspective. For example, I've been writing a project with my friend and collaborator, Charlotte, and it's based on the idea that she had previously developed, but she felt my passions and my interests and ability within the project was best utilized in furthering her characters. This was due to how strong her framework was, and I felt that my ability as a writer lies in realistic and empathetic writing of characters and how they would behave in absurd moments, which is something that I've kind of thought about as well, in the sense that sometimes you can get brought onto a project not to do what you normally do, not to just work on a project as you normally might. You might just be making all the characters more believable, or making the jokes funnier. I guess the takeaway here for me would be, when collaborating with someone who's more in charge of the project, I think it might be important to distinguish what people want from you as a writer or a consultant and how to do that most efficiently. I also asked Sophie what she preferred out of working alone or collaborating with other creatives, and she said, I love working with people and bouncing off them. I definitely don't see myself as a genius writer. My passion lies within really developing a story and seeing both my own voice and others meld to create something that we could have never done alone. This is something I've always loved, and I think I've benefited from not necessarily having an ego when it comes to an idea being mine or struggling to take on others' feedback for projects. I don't know what I'm talking about. I noticed that Sophie focuses a lot in her projects on gender, and more specifically female friendships and female relationships. Aside from how horribly women have been written by men throughout film history, what draws you to writing women-led projects? I think in my own personal life, women are so fucking funny and interesting and layered, and I just don't see enough of that on screen. I feel really strongly about representation for women because I know they have something to say, to impart and to teach to audiences, and they'd be entertaining doing so. I just finished watching the brilliant new mockumentary called Abbott Elementary, and it's one of the best new shows I've seen in years. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was written, stars, and involves a lot of female and black voices, because the writing feels so new, brilliant, and vibrant, which is because it is. Quinta Brunson isn't the first comedian or showrunner to recognize these stories and humor of teachers and a school environment, but she is the first to develop the idea with these voices. The reason I bring this up is Ava, the principal, is giving us Michael Scott if he were evil, and she's doing it better than anyone else ever has. She's a woman and she sucks, but it's kind of awesome. I've noticed, depressingly enough, that it is an industry that often decides your value very quickly. The more legitimate I have become and the more credits that I can cite, the better experiences I've had collaborating in the development of these projects has been quicker and felt smoother. This is not something I think is good. I think that emerging creatives should be working together more rather than trying to network their way up to the CEO of Apple TV or dismissing their peers. But it has felt like the unfortunate reality of the industry in my experience. Sad, sad, sad. My final question relates more directly to the subject and the second and third assignment. I posited the question: if you were given a 2050 themed World Expo project, what would you do? If given the prompt, top of my head, I'm wondering, what does the world look like in 2050? Are we underwater? Is my dog still alive? Did we find a way to give her immortality? Am I still alive? Am I hot? Does Wordle still exist? Is there a joke for the Wordle Expo? Or is that time past? I had to Google what a World Expo was. So did I. And I'm still a bit confused. I think though I'd do something about swimming. I think we will all be swimming anyway. I think the world will be underwater maybe. I don't know though. I don't know much about the world. It isn't my business. And that's a really good point. Writers do characters and stories, and scientists do the world. That being said, I do think it is an interesting perspective to ask questions instead of positing ideas. Positing? Did I say that word earlier incorrectly?